The prevailing response to what was soon seen as a crisis in the family was a surge of institutional support for families. Marital clinics, child guidance clinics, parent education, birth control, and maternal and infant hygiene all drew attention. The first marital clinic opened its doors in Los Angeles in 1930, but it was quickly followed by programs in many states that led finally to the National Conference on Family Relations in 1938. All these programs drew attention to the breakdown of traditional family functions. There was, said the expert, only one remaining role for the family: to provide happiness for mates and to raise the young. Traditionalists interpreted this remaining function as a mandate for women to stay in families to help them develop sufficient affective and inner strength to withstand economic buffeting. Changing attitudes turned what had been a joyous discovery of freedom to work for women of the 1920s into a bitter debate over who had the right to a job. The issue was no longer one of individual satisfaction or autonomy, but of how to participate in resolving a larger set of social issues. If there were relatively few jobs to be had, then, went the common wisdom, those jobs should go to those who needed to support families. Married women, it was thought, really had two jobs, and in their households there were two incomes instead of one shared income. This, thought many, was fundamentally unfair. Married women with working husbands should never be hired. Virulent opposition to married women who earned wages emerged early in the Depression years and spread rapidly. But married women were not the only victims. In some sense, need, as opposed to ambition or work satisfaction or qualifications for the job, was the criterion by which the 1930s measured women who sought to earn wages. A woman who didn't need a job, who didn't need to support a family, should stay at home. But the broad popular consensus agreed that women's work should be conditioned not by her own needs, but by those of her family. The slogan that a woman's place is in the home became once again popular. The wage work of married women, it was thought, would jeopardize family life. It would deny women sufficient time to cultivate womenly arts and to care for their children. Barring the threat of starvation or eviction, women who could not or did not stay home with their children would, it was thought, raise incorrigible truants and thieves. She had an obligation to remain at home, moreover, because venturing into the workforce was selfish, depriving needy women and men of jobs and their husbands of companionship. At least, that was the thought as the idea of economic need rationalized who might legitimately be entitled to work. Predictably, those ideas had economic consequences. Most auto companies by the early part of the 1930s had adopted the Ford Company's plan to pay married working men a $5 a day wage. You'll remember that was a pretty good wage in the 1920s, one sufficient to support a family. Single men might be hired if they had marriage in view or were supporting elderly parents. But the company required wives of those who earned $5 a day to stay at home. This worked fine in a decade of prosperity. When the Ford Motor Company reduced hours for men in the 1930s, some wives decided to find jobs. Not long after, the company simply fired all its female workers. It wanted turnover among women. It paid women less. It could not afford to keep women who, by virtue of seniority, would begin to earn higher wages, neither did it want to pay them a family wage. As a result, it was easier to fire both married and single women. The married women went first. General Motors followed suit, firing married, divorced, and widowed women in that order before it determined to dismiss or retain the women they wanted on the basis of company need rather than on the basis of marital status. GM did so by simply accusing women it didn't want to keep on any longer of inefficiency or lack of cooperation. The electrical industry, which had expanded dramatically in the 1920s by employing large numbers of mostly single women, began in 1930 to dismiss women who it deemed to be adequately supported by parents. It dismissed married women as well. One famous set of studies conducted at the Hawthorne plant in Chicago revealed that women argued over the marriage distinction. In the view of women working in the company had an obligation to protect anyone, married or single, responsible for supporting a family. But in fairness, they argued, married women with working husbands should be the first to go. Such a policy was difficult to enforce. Some women who married during the course of their employment simply hid their marriages. A few got divorced or moved into separate residences from their husbands in order to keep their jobs. In 1932, the federal government passed an Economy Act designed to save money. Section 213 of that act argued that in case of retrenchment, employers, including the federal government, should dismiss people whose spouses were employed by the government. The law was ostensibly gender neutral, but in practice, the one spouse designated to lose a job was invariably the lesser earning spouse, almost always the female partner of a male employee. Hundreds of women were in fact dismissed under the Federal Economy Act before Section 213 was rescinded in 1937. In the same years, teachers and government employees at the municipal and state levels were routinely dismissed if they were discovered to be married. Clauses denying municipal governments the right to hire married women prevailed everywhere, and in private industry, this was true too. These policies drew general approval. Informal pressure, especially on married women to give up their jobs, was everywhere to be seen and everywhere admired. The Women's Magazine carried articles from some women who declared, "You can have my job, a feminist discovers her home." Such articles suggested the return of the leisured woman who valued her duties at home above those of wage labor. Harper's Magazine in 1933 published a piece by the critic Norman Cousins, who declared that women were home-minded. They were opposed to anything that tends towards preserving the family against anything that might weaken the family or the traditional unit of our civilization, Cousins argued. Depression unemployment, he argued, could be solved simply by removing the 10 million women then working in the labor force from their jobs. After all, he said, if those 10 million women were fired, there would be 10 million jobs for unemployed men. Of course, he was wrong about this. Men and women simply didn't move smoothly into each other's jobs. But his argument suggests something of the irrational anger that surrounded women who took jobs. In fact, women managed to keep their jobs in much larger numbers than anyone had imagined they would. Despite public policy, women's employment numbers inched up slightly during the Depression. They'd been a little more than 24% of all workers in 1930. By 1940, they had passed 25%. of all workers. And though the wages of both men and women fell in the early Depression years, women's wages did not fall as fast as those of men. Even as the manufacturing sector declined, the sectors that employed women expanded. And this was particularly true in the new federal bureaucracies that were created by the New Deal, as well as in municipal government and other areas. Employers in those areas needed low-wage workers and happily paid lip service to the family wage ideal for male workers, even as they filled their jobs with women. And women, for their part, grabbed jobs that they needed in order to support their families.